If you clicked on this video, I'm sure you're wondering, what lens is that? I've never heard of a 16-43 for the L mount. And you're right, it's not technically a 16-43, it's the 16-28, it's a Sigma, it's a f2.8 with a constant aperture, but I'm using it on the S9 with one of the unique features of the Lumix S9, and that's hybrid zoom. I'm gonna put some footage up here over here and maybe even full screen so you can see the difference of what this looks like in practice. It's actually really, really cool. I'm surprised it works as well as it does. You see, hybrid zoom will basically live crop as you're zooming, and it creates this almost telephoto extension effect to any lens, not just this lens, but any lens you use with the S9. This is not a feature available on the S5 Mark II yet, although I really do hope they update the firmware for the S5 Mark II and give us this amazing feature, because it just increases the versatility in what you're able to do with the camera. A lot of us, we feel limited by our focal lengths. We're wondering, which lens do I buy? Which zoom range do I need? What aperture sacrifices am I going to make? And this combination, the S9 with hybrid zoom, along with the Sigma 16-28, becoming effectively a 16-43, is such an amazing combination. It's perfect for the way I like to shoot, where I want to get up close and personal sometimes, but have that wider focal length so I get a little bit more context, a little more spatial awareness to my footage sometimes. It's not always the most cinematic to shoot with something like a 16 or a 20 mil. That's not what I'm going for all the time. I'm going for that more real, authentic, genuine feeling of being somewhere close. A lot of times longer lenses will give you more compression. They'll give you some of that classic cinematography look and feel. And while I do love that, things like the 35-150, great, awesome lens. I actually know someone who just picked one up because they wanted that longer, more compressed, like create more of a claustrophobic image. And that's kind of a negative way to say it, but that's what gives you more of that cinematic style. If you watch something like The Bear, you'll know what I mean, where things just look more cinematic, but there's often those longer lenses giving you more compression. And I tend, for certain projects, to like the wider field of view that you get with a wider focal length, and it just brings you into the space more. You feel it's more like intimate, it's more authentic, feels more real versus something more distant and further away that's like you're watching someone else experience something. A lot of times for a vlog or even documentary, reality TV, whatever it might be, you want to feel like you're actually in the space, not just watching it on a screen. So I really like those wider focal lengths, but I also like to zoom in from time to time to get those close-ups, to give a little bit of compression to the image. And having something like a 16-43 is beyond phenomenal. Now, it does come with some sacrifices because this isn't a true full frame 16-43. It is a full frame lens. It is a constant aperture at 2.8, but as you're zooming, it is cropping into the sensor, and it is thus kind of limiting that field of view that you normally would get with full frame. So it's not like a full frame 43, but it's more like an APS-C, the 43 equivalent. It still technically would be like a 43 on full frame, but I don't know what that, maybe more like a 28, I guess, on APS-C is technically how it's working if you want to get into the math and all the cropping. But what's cool about the hybrid zoom is that it happens just while you're zooming. You don't have to do anything extra. There's no more buttons to push. There's not extra settings. You're just zooming with the lens like you normally would, and it's cropping the sensor at the same time and giving you this really cool effect. So you're not getting the same, depth of field characteristics that you would get with a true 16-43 millimeter lens, but honestly, you can't really tell. And oftentimes I'm not going for that anyway when I'm doing this. I just wanted something that had a constant aperture, and this does achieve that. So I'm not having the variable aperture that you get with things like the 20-60 Lumix lens, Rokinon, Samyang, that 35-150, that's also a variable aperture. So a lot of times you're trying to find that perfect lens, and it either has the constant aperture, but maybe it's big and bulky, something like the 28-45. That's kind of big and heavy class. I mean, it's got a giant aperture, so it's fine, I'll take it. But something like the 16-28 has the constant aperture, but it's nice, small, super compact for a zoom lens of this caliber, I would say. And now I can use it beyond its normally limiting 28 millimeter reach, and I can get something more like a 43. Now, You might say, well, can't I just do this in post-production? If I shoot 6K, which if you do shoot 6K on the S9, you can't use this hybrid zoom effect. 6K is using the majority of the sensor, so there's nothing to crop in on. But if you're using 4K, like what I was doing, that extra resolution is what allows the camera to crop in this kind of live hybrid zoom model. You could achieve this in post-production by shooting 6K and then cropping in, but that comes with some trade-offs, some sacrifices. Not only are you having to do extra work in post-production, cropping in and dealing with, keyframes or something like that, which is kind of tedious and time consuming and ultimately probably a waste of time when you can just do it live in the camera. It also comes with, if you're doing it in post-production, that's after compression. So the video file has been recorded, it's gone through compression, and now you're cropping in on it. Whereas on the S9, if you're doing it with hybrid zoom, this is all happening live as a crop from the sensor. So you're getting that full resolution, then it's getting compressed and baked into the file. And theoretically, there's probably some added benefits in terms of image quality when you're doing it on the camera versus with a recorded file. So again, you can't do this when you're shooting 6K or in some of the modes like 4K 60, which is already cropped. So it is limiting in terms of what codecs and resolutions you have available. But if you're shooting just regular 4K, Ultra HD, your standard 3840 by 2160, you get this great option to live crop with just a normal zoom. And I love that. I love being able to use the lens in its physical mechanism of zooming rather than having a touchscreen interface or anything goofy that I have to do as sort of like an artificial, more digital feeling. And it happens quite seamlessly. You'll notice every once in a while there's some, I'd say like, I don't know, imperceptible, strange artifacting, but it's like 1% of the time. For the most part, and I was being aggressive with my test footage, zooming an awful lot. Normally, if I was filming, this wouldn't be a problem at all. And I actually really quite like how the feature works. It's just as you're zooming, it's cropping and giving you that extra reach. And it is a noticeable difference. You might think, well, what's the difference between a 28 and a 43? And actually, it's quite significant. It's quite staggering when you actually put them side by side and you look at, wow, a 16 to 28 really isn't much. That's not much throw. You're not getting that much reach out of a 16 to 28, which is kind of what steered me away from the 16 to 28 in the first place. It's a great lens. It works. It does well. I've used it on the S5 Mark II in just its normal 16 to 28 mode, and it works and it's fine. But with the S9, with this hybrid zoom, that extra reach just makes it seem like such a more powerful lens because I'm going all the way from 16 all the way to 43, which 43 is pretty close to 50, which is kind of your standard medium focal length. And now you have this awesome, amazing lens, constant aperture. There's no additional weight or bulk or anything like that. And although there is some sacrifices in terms of, going to more of a pixel to pixel resolution versus the oversampled full frame 6K, extra resolution downsampled to 4K, you're losing a little bit, but you're also gaining a lot of functionality out in the field from the shoot. Again, nothing to deal with in post-production. It's all happening live in the camera, recorded. It's as if you have a 16 to 43. So that's why I called this video what I did. It truly is kind of that perfect combination. And that's why it's unfortunate it's limited to just the S9, because the S9 does have some limitations. There's no headphone jack. Now, if you're running wireless receiver, something like the DJI mic, the receiver itself has a headphone jack, so you can work around it, but there is no headphone jack on the S9. There is a microphone input, so it is nice. You can record your own audio, but there's no headphone, so be aware. And it's kind of a unfortunate limitation. Not only is it micro HDMI, but it's also on the side of the grip. So if you're holding the camera, you can't easily plug in USB-C for power or HDMI for monitoring. So the S9 is built really to be handheld, not to be, kitted out with things plugged into it in a usable way like you'd have on maybe like the S5 Mark II, where all those ports are on the left side and keeps it away from your grip. So there's some compromise, there's some sacrifice when shooting with the S9. It is susceptible to overheating, although in my testing that hasn't been that big of an issue. If you're filming in relatively comfortable, cool indoor environments, not a problem. You can record for hours on the S9. but it's not as robust as something like the S5 Mark II, which is really why I want this hybrid zoom feature to be added to the S5 Mark II. I think it's that extra little finishing touch that would really give me the most out of the S5 Mark II. They've updated the firmware a lot. Lumix, Panasonic has been very gracious with their firmware updates. And I want to be a little bit greedy. I want to ask for a little bit more and say, just give us all these amazing features that you're adding to the software side of the equation. Now, maybe there's some limitation. Maybe the S9 is using a fancier processor. I don't know. But I think for the most part, it should be pretty reasonable to add this hybrid zoom feature into the S5 Mark II. And I hope that actually happens because it's one of the nice advantages. I don't know why, for whatever reason, the Lumix software side seems to be just a little bit better, a little bit fancier when it comes to like when you just conceptually think about it. I'm zooming, and as I'm zooming, it is live cropping simultaneously off the sensor and recording all that data in real time. That's kind of crazy to me. It's almost like it's a cool feature. It's pretty neat, but it's also really impressive from a technical standpoint. I wonder how difficult that was to program and code and process. Me physically zooming and live cropping all in real time, it's kind of mind-blowing when you get your hands on it, you experience it, because again, that reach is significant. And think, this isn't, again, just for the 16 to 20, this is for any lens you use on the S9 as long as it's a zoom lens. It doesn't work with prime lenses. There's a different feature called crop zoom, and that works with primes where you can kind of artificially on the screen adjust the zoom of the prime. So that's maybe a neat trick to do, like zoom with your prime lens. But I think the hybrid zoom is the better feature, more useful for zoom lenses, because I'm not changing the way I'm operating the camera. I'm still zooming with the lens. I don't have to touch the screen, and it's giving me that extra reach.